Be my guest, be my guest, be my guest with Sean Boy Joe.
Hello, my friends, and welcome once again to the Be My Guest podcast channel with me, your boy, Sean Boy Joe. My guest today has worked extensively in children's TV as an actor, voice artist, and presenter since the late 1980s. From the long-running BBC educational series Words and Pictures to playing Minnie, the Mini Magician in the much-loved 90s children's programme Zzzap. However, she will always be fondly remembered for playing one of Doctor Who's most iconic companions, Ace. Here to talk to us about reprising that very role and everything in between, I'm proud to welcome the one and only national treasure that is Sophie Aldred. Be my guest. Welcome, Sophie.
Oh, thank you so much, Sean. Hello,
Hi.
everyone. Gosh, I never thought I was a national treasure.
I don't suppose you do you really? You know, when you're in
No,
that sort of world, it's down to us who watch you to sort of say that, but it is true.
Aww.
It's wonderful to have you on the channel. As I do with all of my guests, I like to go through a timeline and start from the very beginning. So, Sophie Aldred, talk to me about a little Sophie growing up. I guess being a television presenter and an actor is something that you've always wanted to do.
Yes, it certainly is. And I don't know where it came from, because none of my family were in the business at all. I have got some relations distantly who were in music hall and variety, I think, and owned pubs and things like that. But really, no, I don't know where it came from. I always remember wanting to perform in some way. I used to boss around the local neighbourhood children and my younger brother and make them be in my plays, apparently when I was about 5 years old. And I don't know where it came from. And I just always loved playing characters, and I was influenced by people who had amazing characters on. We listened to a lot of Radio 4 when I was growing up, and I loved people like Kenneth Williams on Just a Minute. And, he had this extraordinary voice.
Yes.
And there was and then there was Derek Nimmo on a thing called All Gas and Gators, and I was just always very intrigued by people's voices. And then the presenting came from my absolute love of Blue Peter. That was where that came from. Val, John and Pete were my trio in the 1960s and 70s, who I grew up with. And I always wanted to follow in their footsteps as well.
Okay.
So it's bound to happen.
Yeah. Well, you've given us a little insight as to what a little Sophie used to watch when she was younger, and we'll come on to that. I'm sure Blue Peter will be thrown into the mix a little bit later. So, extraordinary, you didn't come really from a presenting or acting background.
No, not at all. No, my mother was it's sort of a housewife, a mother, that's probably possibly one of the most challenging jobs in the world. And my father was in advertising, but not on the kind of creative side. He was on the account side, and he entertained clients and was very good at what he did. People loved and love my dad. He was a lovely person,
right.
and he was very good at what he did. I think he was one of the youngest people to be made a director at O&M, it's called now.
Okay.
It was called Ogilvy, Benson and Mather back in the day, and a lot of other things besides. So that's what he did.
Right.
I had no idea what he really did. He just went out in the morning and came back in the evening.
Well, right,
and
yeah.
it was my wonderful mother who, was around for me and my brother, and and probably slightly frustrated actually, because in the early 60s, that's what women did, and she would have actually benefited from having a job and going out and doing that. It's a shame, really. I think such a lot of women's lives were not wasted, because being a mother is never a waste, but I think for those women who find it challenging being at home all day with small children, and not having not using their brains in a way that they really want to, she's very very bright and very clever, and she's very literary. I think it must have been very frustrating at times for those women.
Yeah, absolutely. But then again, it was a different kind of world back then, and I think we've kind of moved on slightly since then.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, I couldn't imagine now what my mother's generation were doing in those days.
No, absolutely.
It was a completely different time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly, as you just said, you didn't really come from that kind of, entertainment background. So talk to us about how you kind of got into the world of television, primarily throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. You became a sort of children's educational presenter in educational programs, and one of the first big breaks that you got into that was on the programme Corners for the BBC.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I had this incredible year. 1987 was one of those years, I think somebody must have been looking down at me and thought, oh, it's her turn. The first thing was that I was in the musical Fiddler on the Roof, in the back row of the chorus, up in Manchester with
Really?
Topol was the incredible guy who created the role in the film, obviously, and he was doing a live version of it in Manchester at the Opera House. And it was there that my agent put me up for 3 episodes of Doctor Who. They wanted somebody who could ride a motorbike and who looked younger than they really were. And I could do both of those. So off I went down to London to do the audition, and I ended up, long story, but I ended up getting Doctor Who, and not only the 3 episodes, but sorry about the noise in the background. That's my husband.
That's all right.
Walking around there with the vacuum cleaner, which is great news.
The life of Sophie Aldred in a podcast.
Yeah.
There's something in that somewhere.
Yeah. And then I'd currently written letters, I think, because I was always quite proactive in my career. I'd written letters to all and sundry, and I'd written to the BBC, to Children's BBC, and somebody, weirdly, in the contracts department had seen my letter and wrote back to me and said, oh, they're having some auditions for people for children's presenting. It's a panel audition, so there'll be 5 or 6 producers there. Why don't you come along? So I did. I went along, and there were indeed 5 producers there from children's. Well, there wasn't any differentiation in those days between the CBBS and children's BBC. It was all just children's programming.
Yes, right, yeah.
And I did my bits. I sang my song. I did a make like in Blue Peter, and of course I've been practicing that for years, doing making things upside down for the camera. And did a piece. I can't remember what I did, but I did that. And I think I worked with a puppet as well. And so I did that, and then a few weeks later I got called in by this lovely couple of producers, Anne Goby and Alison Stewart, her director, and I went and auditioned for this programme Corners. And the idea was that children would write in with all their questions. Children ask questions all the time, and so they should. It's a brilliant thing to do, to ask questions about the world. And then the idea was that the programme would answer these questions in a variety of ways. And so with singing, with puppets, with all sorts, with sketches, and just straight presenting as well. And it was as though the programme had been made for me. It was just brilliant. And I got that role as well. So then I filmed Doctor Who first, which is a bit confusing to people because Corners actually was transmitted.
Yeah.
But the first time I was in a studio with Doctor Who, and we did a story, and then I went straight into doing Corners.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for the next 3 years.
But they were broadcast the other way round, strangely enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, I cut my teeth on Doctor Who.
There we
doing
go.
the acting, and then I did the presenting, and it was fantastic because that's where I really did my training at
Right.
the BBC, in the studios, and just learned so much in such a short space of time. But I just took to it. I loved it. I absolutely loved the medium of TV. I loved the people who were working in it. We had such fun doing it. Corners was a really great experience. I was working initially with wonderful co-presenter Simon Davis and great director Alison Stewart, who's still a friend, and she went on to be one of the people at the very top of the CBBS.
Oh, how wonderful.
So yes, all that was, it was as though, somebody smiled on me and said, yep, she's going to work for the next three and a half years at the BBC College.
Well, there you go.
Best training.
Yeah. And you loved it, and they obviously loved you because you've had such a longevity in that sort of world of children's television. I mean, as you said, Corners was the first big break for you, and you learnt a lot doing that. And you, of course, you mentioned, at the same time doing Doctor Who. Let's go on to that for a little while and talk a little bit about that, as people will be itching to know exactly, what it was like to play such an iconic character. I often look at people who are in Doctor Who, and when you're in it, and for someone like you, I guess, being so young, you would quite possibly remember watching it before you were even on the show. It must have been so surreal to actually be in the midst of it all.
Yes, it was just incredible because I'd watched Doctor Who growing up. As a child, I was so scared of the Cybermen that my mum stopped me watching it for a while because I was having nightmares about the Cybermen.
Yeah.
And I always remember that I used to stand outside the living room where our telly was, and I'd watch it through a crack in the door so that I could shut the door if it got too scary. And I'd make my younger brother sit on the sofa and watch it. I think he probably had a cushion to put over his eyes if it got scary. But that's what you did in those days.
Yeah.
And it was, I can't remember that much about it. It's funny, I'm the kind of person who, I remember feelings and atmosphere and smells and things like that, but I don't remember incidents that well.
Okay.
But I just remember this flavour of Doctor Who. John Pertwee was the first Doctor that I ever watched.
Right.
Although I'm old enough to have watched Patrick Troughton, but I don't remember him. I think he may not have even had a TV in those days.
Right, okay.
But yeah, John Pertwee was my first Doctor. And then I remember being outraged when John Pertwee regenerated into somebody called Tom Baker. I remember my mum reading it in the papers, and I was so upset.
Right.
Just as everybody is when their Doctor regenerates
into
somebody else. And then, of course, Tom was absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
He was a fantastic Doctor as well.
Right, yeah. And your Doctor was Sylvester McCoy?
My own Doctor, my personal Doctor was Sylvester McCoy, exactly.
Yeah.
And that was a long time later. And when I got to audition and got the part, I didn't really even know it was still on. I'd stopped watching once I went to university when Peter Davison was the Doctor, so I'd missed all of Colin Baker's tenure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was just as pleased as anything that I was going to suddenly be catapulted into this iconic role of being a Doctor Who assistant.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the sort of big roles on British telly.
Yeah, and obviously coming with a sci-fi program, you're going to get all of the media that comes with it outside. I mean, it must be surreal. I think back now, and people say to me, well, on our walls, as teenagers, we had Samantha Fox, and next to Samantha Fox we had Ace, Sophie Aldred, big poster pin-ups, thinking that must have been, you were every sci-fi geek's dream to have on their wall, in magazines, comics, posters all over the shop. Just incredible.
That's an extraordinary thought.
Yeah.
And of course, the character of Ace was so great because there wasn't really anything like it on British television before or at the time. There wasn't this sort of realistic, feisty, give as good as you get, running around chucking explosives and beating up Daleks with baseball bats. There just hadn't been that before.
Right.
And I think that made such an impression. I still get women coming up to me, which I'm so proud of. They come up to me and they say, "You were such a role model to me growing up." And
wow.
Particularly women who got bullied at school or who were having really bad time at home when they were teenagers. They often come up and say to me at conventions, I would ask myself, what would Ace do? And I think that's just such a wonderful testament to the character of Ace.
Isn't it just?
How proud I am to have played her.
What a legacy to leave, really. I mean, incredibly. I mean, you just look at that character, when you look at her on magazines and books, and you just can't help but smile because she just beams with happiness, which is wonderful. And you talking more on Doctor Who, you as I think, if I'm right in saying, you were the very last companion on the original series.
That's correct,
right.
Yes, because the BBC, they kind of lost faith, the powers that be, in Doctor Who, and they were trying to get rid of it for a while. And they put it opposite Coronation Street on a Wednesday night, thinking that it would die a death, and it didn't. And then in the end, they said, right, that's it, that's enough. So that was in 1989, and the last you see of the Seventh Doctor and Ace is us walking off into the bushes, and a beautiful speech which Sylvester's Doctor gives, which ends up, "Come on, Ace, we've got work to do." and so yes, it was left in this hiatus,
right,
until the new series.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And Ace has never really gone away. The character has always kind of been there because, since then you've produced a number of audiobooks.
Well, I'm very, very glad to have been playing Ace for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Big Finish was a brilliant company that rose out of the ashes of Doctor Who on the BBC, run by fans. And they went to the BBC after a while and said, "Can we have the license?" And the BBC said no initially, and then they persisted. They went back, and eventually the BBC said, "Yeah, all right then." Gave them the license to the BBC, and Big Finish is now a massive company that serves fans of all sorts of shows that would not otherwise have seen the light of day, and gives brilliant gainful employment to wonderful actors and brilliant post-production people.
Yeah.
I say brilliant a lot, don't I? But I do mean it.
No, yes, I'm sure you do, yes. It was brilliant. So in those stories we kind of see a continuation of Ace and her journey, do we not?
Yes, we do, and we see all sorts of different varieties of her journey, because there's lots of different timelines and lots of different ways she goes. I think she's even died in the comic strip in Doctor Who magazine at one stage, and then there's all these wonderful spin-offs as well that people have done over the years. Lots of different takes on Doctor Who, and it's a whole world of Doctor Who out there.
Yeah, amazing. I often think to myself, I would love to be, be a character, on a comic book, and you've done that many times in your career, and we'll come on to the other roles that you've done in comic books very soon. But yeah, Doctor Who again was incredible, and recently, a couple of years ago, you had the honour of writing a Doctor Who book.
Yes, that was an amazing event because I just got an email out of the blue from Steve Cole, who'd been working years ago with me in BBC Books, and I did some audio books for him. And he said that Tom Baker's book had gone down extremely well, and Ace was the next character that Penguin Random House wanted to have a story from. And would I be interested in collaborating with him and Mike Tucker, who is a very good friend of mine, who is our visual effects, one of our visual effects people in the show years ago, so he knew the character of Ace very well, and we came up with this book, and I'm so proud of it. Yeah, it's wonderful to have been asked to do such a thing. Absolutely,
and any collectors out there, would be rushing to get that book now. They've heard you've got the Doctor Who book out. A great read. In Doctor Who. And we're going to come on a little bit later about what you're doing now, and you're reprising the role of Ace, and we'll talk about that at the end, and all of the Comic-Cons that you're doing. You're touring America very soon. In Doctor Who, there were so many brightly coloured and crazy costumes with all the characters, and that leads me on to another programme that had some crazy costumes, and we're back to the educational programmes for the BBC, and that was Melvin and Marvin's Musicogram.
Oh, Melvin and Maureen's.
Melvin and Maureen's, there we go.
Yeah, it was, my husband says that he considers that my best work.
Really?
It was such fun. It was meant to be for preschool children, to educate them in all kinds of music, and indeed it did. But along the way, it's this completely bonkers program. I think you can see it on YouTube.
Yeah, very funny program.
Called Maureen, who I kind of based a little bit on Sybil in Fawlty Towers.
Okay.
She used to call Melvin a bit like Sybil.
Yeah. Basil, yes.
And yes, it was great. We were blessed with the most brilliant costume designer who rifled through the BBC wardrobe and came out with the most outrageous outfits for me.
For its time as well, yeah.
Oh yeah. And then also a brilliant makeup designer who put me in the most incredible hair designs, beehives, and wonderful makeup. So it's a wonderful, colourful, crazy exploration of music, and I love it. It's not often that you cry with laughter, is it? But most days that we were rehearsing and recording Melvin and Maureen's, we would actually end up crying with laughter.
I can just imagine that.
Yeah,
and it came across on screen brilliantly. I mean, for an educational program, it was actually incredibly funny to watch as well. Very beautifully written, I think. Although it was for younger children, I mean, it's a sort of program that would sort of branch out to older kids as well, and they would just enjoy it as much as the younger kids.
Yes, well, the writing is due to Simon Davis, who I co-presented Corners with initially.
Right.
So that was
okay,
his writing.
Okay, yeah. Okay, brilliant. So yeah, what a fantastic show. And at that time, you were kind of at the height of presenting educational programs, because you went on to present Words and Pictures for the BBC, which incredibly ran for so many years and was so successful. And then you were sort of launched into becoming the face of Words and Pictures throughout the 90s.
Oh, Words and Pictures was a dream to do. I think I did about 5 series of that. We won awards. And what was lovely was, again, a great team of people in the production office. Everybody in children's TV at the BBC was completely dedicated to children and the education and entertainment of children.
Right.
It's a wonderful, wonderful department. And looking back, I just think I was blessed to have worked with these people who were so dedicated and so good at what they did. And
Right.
I learned such a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently teachers really liked the program.
Yeah.
They felt apparently not threatened by me, or they felt that I was quite very natural, and that to me is the ultimate.
Yeah, that absolutely came across. I mean, with
Thought
parents
well
as
of,
well.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah,
To be
absolutely
thought
came
well of
across.
by teachers.
I think one of the joyous things about children's educational programming. I mean, for me, on a personal level, I didn't like school in the very early years. I didn't want to go to school, but it was people
Right.
like you where we came into school and then the teachers would introduce us to these programs. I think it's good when you're a presenter to present something on television, but to know that you're actually not just presenting something but making a difference in schools and in young children's lives.
You couldn't have put it better. I love the idea that me, that I can make a difference to people, because I think basically that's what we want to do as human beings, that we do want to make a difference in life. And, not for an ego thing, but just because I've always loved the idea that somebody meets me or sees something and their life will be a little bit better or changed or
Absolutely.
whatever. And yes, to have had that influence on people's literacy and numeracy, actually, in number time. I'm just thinking number time as well.
Yeah.
Is a gift.
Yeah.
Gift.
If you never went down that sort of road of children's TV and sort of acting, because you were heavily involved in children's education, do you ever think to yourself, well, actually, I might have made a very good teacher?
Yes, well, I have done some teaching over the years.
Right.
And I've always loved working with children. They say you never work with children and animals.
Right.
I've always, had some affinity with children, maybe because I'm a child myself at heart.
Right.
And yeah, I love being around children. I love the way children's minds work. I love curiosity about the world, and I love making a difference to them. So yes, I think I probably would have gone into teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And we mentioned Words and Pictures there. You were the longest serving presenter of that show, one of them, which is all credit to yourself. So much so, I think you had a year off and then they brought you back because you were so popular. And they thought, we need more of this. And this is kind of when we got to see your kind of alter ego in kids television, where the name Sophie Socket came about.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, another great crew of people.
Right.
We were all of a sort of similar age, everybody who was making it, and it was a very early day for satellite TV.
Right.
So it felt like we were sort of pioneering on there, and I actually got that role because of this the woman who lived down our road, Carol Chell, who used to be a presenter on Play School when I was growing up. And I met Carol, and she offered to help me years before with audition pieces for drama school. That was when I was about 17, and so and I used to babysit for her children. Anyway, all these years later, she was asked to do all the preschool output for the children's channel.
Oh yes,
and she presented and produced that, and then she didn't want to do it anymore, and she just got in touch with me and she said, Sophie, would you like to do the preschool stuff? I said, yeah, that would be great.
Right.
And it was wonderful. We recorded initially we recorded in a tiny little studio, converted chapel in St John's Wood, and then we did stuff down in Maidstone as well. But Sophie Socket was born, and what fun that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how all of us got to know you. And you spoke about a tiny little room. Talk to me about a tiny little crew you were involved with, which was actually one of my all-time favourite shows ever as a child. I was, to say the least, obsessed with it. I absolutely loved that programme. I used to watch it on the weekends with my auntie, thinking, well, I can watch this now because I've got cable and you haven't. So it was sort of that kind of show.
Yeah. Well, it was the funnest thing to do.
Was it really?
And we had a lovely time recording that, and it was Tiny. Do you remember Tiny's bag is flashing? Tiny's bag is flashing,
yes.
so let's see what we can find. It was a sort of version of Sophie Socket and Guess What's in My Pocket.
That's where it came from. Okay.
Yeah, it was a lovely.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you had the little pocket with Sophie in it, didn't you? Yeah. Guessing
That's
what was
right,
inside.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was great because I got to realise one of my childhood dreams, which was to be wearing a pair of red kickers.
Oh,
I
yes.
always wanted a pair, and they let me wear them.
I always wanted as a child a massive dice. And I thought, where did they get that dice from? And I always thought they've missed the trick here because they could sell a massive dice.
They could.
Yeah.
They marketed that massive dice.
Yeah, right. We're moving on slightly. That was a sort of a happy trip down memory lane for me. You know, something that I absolutely adored watching. We're going to go on to another paranormal show that you were involved with, which is the CiTV show. We're moving on quite a few years now to a show called It's a Mystery, which you presented with a certain Mr. Art Attack himself, Neil Buchanan.
Yeah.
And you did that for one
lovely
series,
to
didn't you?
Neil.
Yeah.
I did. It was around the time I was doing Tiny and Crew down in Maidstone, and
Okay.
I did quite a lot. I got to know Neil and Tim, his business partner, and I did a few things for them. I did It's a Mystery,
Right.
and which I loved, absolutely loved. That was great. It was fun, really good fun working with Neil, and I loved the subject as well. Paranormal type thing.
Yeah.
And we were sort of meant to be a bit like Mulder and Scully in our suits, you know,
Right.
really smart.
Yeah.
And we'd go and investigate all these. Just, you know, is it true? Did it happen? And then I think I did that first, and then they asked me to do Zzzap with Minnie the Mini Magician. Again, a show I absolutely loved.
Yeah.
What a character.
Yeah.
Great fun doing that.
Did
and
it
then
feel...
there was Sorry, go on.
No, did it feel strange coming from preschool television, going into sort of television for older children with It's a Mystery? Because you were playing to an older crowd, weren't you?
No, I've never it's never bothered me before.
Right.
I've always mixed it up. So
Yeah.
That's another thing, you know, am I an adult presenter? Am I an older
Right.
children's presenter? No, I never really thought about it.
So you play to all children on one sort of level?
Yeah.
Right,
So
okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, the thing is that I think that people misunderstand what children need.
Yeah.
And the thing is that children are very wise,
Mhm.
and young children like to have people speaking to them, because they're around adults a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And then if you have somebody suddenly patronising them, it's like,
Absolutely.
What's going on there? You know.
Absolutely.
So I treat everybody.
Absolutely, and as you
pretty
said,
much
children are sort of like sponges. They like to ask questions and soak things up and let them ask those questions. You know, I think if you don't ask the questions, then you won't get the relevant answers, and that's what, you know, is really important about, you know, programs that you've presented and programs that are out there now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very
really
important.
agree
Yeah.
with that.
So, you spoke about working alongside Neil Buchanan on It's a Mystery, and then you landed a role that he sort of played in Zzzap. So you took over from Neil, from his character in the late 90s, and you starred in the absolutely bonkers show that was Zzzap as Minnie the Magician. What was it like coming into a program that was, I guess, at the time, so very well established?
Well, it was a wonderful show to do. I think partly because it was one of its kind.
Right.
There weren't many TV shows that you didn't hear people speaking very much.
Yeah.
And it's based on a comic, which of course is great.
Yeah.
I love comics.
Yeah.
I remember loving the Beano and the
Yeah.
Dandy and Whizzer and Chips and all
Yeah.
sorts when I was
Yeah.
growing up. So it was a great format, and then there was that great thing at the beginning where the camera would pan over the front page of the comic, and you'd think, oh, who's it going to be now?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And you could guess who it was going to
Yeah.
be. And Minnie the Mini Magician, I loved her character because she was very cute and very sweet, and it was a clever way of using the magic of television to do magic on
Right.
TV.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was.
Yeah, and not having a speaking role must have been, great or in your favour, because it means you don't have as many lines to learn.
Oh yes, exactly. Well, I've always loved doing physical theatre,
Right.
physical comedy, especially,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that I seem to do quite naturally. So
Right.
I'm not self-conscious at all, especially when I'm in that way.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you mentioned that there wasn't really a program out there at the time for kids. I don't think there ever will be. I mean, you must have got away with some of the most bizarre stuff on that show. I mean, nowadays, you just wouldn't get away with that. But it was just incredible.
Yes.
It must have felt like a very welcoming place to be a part of. And I guess, Neil was very supportive of you going into the show, having been one of the creators behind it.
Yeah, well, he and Tim asked me to do it. They kept just asking me
wow.
to do things, and I just said, "Yep, I'll do that."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly, and it was an honour to do something like that. And I loved the studios. It was the old TVS studios down in Maidstone.
Okay.
And again, a bit like the BBC crews. It was a lot of people who'd been together, working together for a long time, and
so you worked with the same people. Yeah.
It felt like a real.
It must have made it very sort of easy to just sort of settle in then.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I guess watching you play her on the screen, we can see, that obviously you've got, I guess, a suit underneath that big costume to sort of plump you up a little bit. Must have been quite an unusual way of doing things.
I've got a funny story about that because, what happened was I not long before I had my first baby, Adam. He was, I can't remember how old he was, but he wasn't crawling or anything. So
Right.
he and my husband came down to the studio, and I hadn't seen the crews and people down there for quite a year or so, and so I was sitting, kind of just relaxing in my big suit, without the costume on, just sort of sitting by the side of the set waiting for a reset. And somebody who I hadn't seen for ages came up and chatted away, and it was really nice to see them. And then I carried on after that. And then apparently what had happened was he'd rushed back to I think it was the Art Attack offices, and he said, "Oh, I've just seen Sophie Aldred. Oh, she's really let herself go since she had a baby."
Oh dear. Oh dear. Now that is a story. Oh dear.
It was really, it was very comfortable.
Yeah.
Because it was nice and squashy, and I'm one of these people. In fact, I'm just going to turn the heating on.
Right.
I'm one of these people who I'm pretty much always cold.
Right.
And so for me, it was actually quite nice to be in this big suit under studio lights because I got nice and hot.
Right. It just doesn't come across. I often ask the guests, and this is probably going to be very easy because you didn't have a lot to say, but I often ask guests whether they can still do voices. Could you still do Minnie's voice, although she didn't really have a lot to say?
No, she didn't really. It was dubbed on afterwards, so I went down to the studio and watched through, and I would do, little voice, little kind of exclamations and things.
Yeah, that's all you have to do, and people are like, yes, we know that character.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and you did all the voices yourself. Did you kind of come up with that? Did they give you leadway to say, well, just make her sound however you want to?
Things like that, and animation and things.
Right.
But you do experiment at the beginning, and they say, could you do a bit more this? And then you kind of work your way through the script. But it's always given by the character. I find that you just kind of know how they're going to sound somehow. Yeah.
Well, you had, you spent quite a number of years on that show, and that show sort of lasted for so long, which is probably why people remember it so well. I guess the show looked very technically challenging to work on. I mean, you had all these split screens, and for its time, the 90s, I think they did some amazing stuff on that show.
Yes, they did, didn't they?
Yeah.
It was really a question of, it was very simple technique,
Right.
Of the stuff disappearing and appearing.
Right.
Which is that I would hold my position while they changed things around.
Ah.
So really, the biggest challenge was keeping perfectly still,
Right.
and people knowing what they were doing. So we would rehearse,
Mhm.
so that everybody knew exactly what props they were going to have to remove or put in,
Yeah.
or change the stuff around. And then I would just stand very, very still, and then
Right.
obviously they lock off the camera, and then that's all done in the editing.
Oh, well, there you
Clever
go.
edited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to anybody out there who's thinking, now you've just ruined it all for me.
Oh yes, spoilers.
It happened, but that is the magic of kids television. How did you do that? Well, it's magic, and that's the way it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. So from one iconic show to moving on to another iconic show, and playing a rather iconic character in that show for an American dub. Talk to me about what it was like playing Bob the Builder when they offered you the job to play one of its characters, and they wanted the character of Mutt to be a female character.
Yes, well, again, I went up for it, and it's funny because I ended up always in auditions. I do these sort of gravelly voices, which were quite.
Right.
In fact, it was after the audition for Muck, I went to pick up my son from school, and a friend said, "Oh, what have you been doing today?" And I said, "Oh, my voice is a bit rough because I've been doing this audition." She said, "Oh, well, you're bound to get it because you always say that. You said that about Dennis The Menace as well, that was difficult for you to do."
Mm-hmm.
So sure enough, I got it. And to be associated with Bob the Builder, wow.
Yeah.
And also to be doing an American accent.
Oh, so you did it in an American accent?
Yes. Well, it was for America. So
Right.
they
Yeah.
wanted it,
Okay.
They wanted an American accent and this sort of a tomboyish
Right.
character. But it was they wanted it to be a girl in America.
Well, what a treasure
So
to be
let's
involved
take
with.
that.
Yeah. Well, that's a memory to be involved in, to look back on. Yeah. I mean, we spoke about, you were speaking about Bob the Builder and how iconic that is. And when you just spoke there, you mentioned Dennis the Menace, and there seems to be a sort of comic book theme running throughout this, because you managed to play the little skimp himself, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
I loved that job. That was another job. That's what I did with Bob Golding.
Okay.
We were talking about him before we started.
We were, yeah.
Yes, so that was another job where we would cry with laughter.
Right.
We had an American director, brilliant director called Frank Gresham, and he didn't know much about Dennis the Menace, because there is a comic book character called Dennis the Menace in America, but it's not our Dennis the Menace.
Oh, that's right. That's the film version, isn't it? Yeah.
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 It's a very different character.
That's right. Blonde-haired guy, isn't it?
That's it.
Yeah.
So our Dennis the Menace, obviously, I said before, I grew up reading the Beano, and it was just what a thrill to be playing this iconic character. The first day we recorded, we did I think two episodes, and then I did him as Cockney Dennis, and then they came back to me. They came back to me and said, "Oh, we're going to have to redo those episodes because the BBC have said why, when Dennis's parents come from up north somewhere, has Dennis got a Cockney accent?" So I had to redo him as a northerner. Well, of course, really, the character Dennis in Dundee, so we should have all been doing Scottish.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's where the Beano is produced. And if you look carefully, especially back in the day, you can see all sorts of Scottish references in
Wow.
Beano.
Well, that's a fact for good old Pointless, isn't it? Wow.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I mean, you must look back and think, all of these iconic roles you've played, from Doctor Who to Dennis the Menace. You must think how lucky was you to just fall into this?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
It's just so lucky to have. Well, I suppose I have. They say you've been in the right place at the right time.
Right.
You do create your luck as well.
Right.
I've always worked quite hard on.
Yeah.
Not networking so much and things like that, but thinking, right, who do I need to be for this role?
Yeah.
I don't know. It is a fair amount of just persistence as well.
Yeah.
Keeping going.
Yeah.
And I am incredibly lucky, as you say, to have played these iconic roles.
No, and we're incredibly fortunate to have you on our screens still after all these years, such a longevity you've had. And we're coming on to more recent times, and I was fascinated because I obviously don't really remember this show because it was a little after my time. But talk to me a little bit about because there's a connection coming here with a Doctor Who actor. Talk to me a little bit about the program Tree Food Tom, and I was really fascinated to hear that your son actually played the real life Tree Food Tom in the opening sequence.
Yes, he's in the opening sequence and the closing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were looking for somebody. Well, when we went in for our first day's recording, they showed us just the pictures for the animation because they were animating to our voices.
Right.
And I said, "Oh, that looks a bit like my eldest son." And they said, "Oh, really? Because we are looking for somebody to be a real boy, to be at the beginning, at the end.
Yeah.
Would he be interested?" And I said, "I don't know. I'll ask him." And he really went along because he wanted to have a look at TV Centre before it was all changed.
Yeah.
Most of it was made into flats.
Yeah.
And I said it's a historic building, and that's where they did all these programs. And he was very interested in history, so he went along for the audition. But nobody knew that he was my son at the audition. My husband took him, and he's got a different name. He's Sophie Aldred.
Right.
So nobody knew. So he absolutely got it on his own merits, and he did a great job.
Well, there you go. And little did he know later that, in times of trouble, you'd be flagging that up with memes and thinking, oh no, I can't believe how young I looked then.
Every birthday, well, he's 22 now. So
Is he really?
Every birthday, somebody will post him as, I can't remember how old he was, but he was probably about, 9 or 10.
Right.
And this cute little boy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mentioned the fact that you worked alongside David Tennant in that. I believe he played a character called Twigs.
Yes, that's right. Well, it was lovely because I'd worked with David once before on a big finish before he had been Doctor Who. And
in the audiobooks.
So
right.
It was lovely to see him again. Yeah, it was really really great. And yeah, wonderful to work with. Always lovely man as well, David. So it was great to work with him.
Wonderful.
And then he was he couldn't do the next series after that. So another really, really great actor called Mark Bonner came in to take his place, and Mark's in you'll see him in all sorts of brilliant programs.
So that's sort of coming up to sort of present day in kids television, and we've just proven that you have such a longevity in it. So what I want to do, as I do with all of the guests, before we talk a little bit about what you're doing now, and I know you're very busy flying out to America next week. So talk to me, first of all, about a little wee Sophie Aldred and what Sophie was watching as a child. I know you touched upon Blue Peter being a great influence to you, but what were you watching on the old telly box?
Oh, well, I did watch Blue Peter. That was my ultimate favourite.
Right.
But then when I was really little, there were all these programmes for preschool. Watch with Mother.
Oh, yes.
And there were things like Andy Pandy and
the Wooden Tops.
Yeah.
Picture
exactly.
Page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trumpton.
Yeah.
Tabwick Green. All those lovely programmes.
Back when things were more innocent, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there were amazing dramas, funnily enough.
Right.
I was talking about this at the weekend with a Doctor Who connection with somebody. There were very terrifying dramas. There was one based on a book which I'd found very scary. The book was called Marianne Dreams.
Oh, right.
And the TV series was, I think it was called Escape from the Dark, and it was about this girl who's recovering in bed and she draws, and these stones have eyes and they come alive. And, oh my goodness, I mean, it was so scary, that.
Mm-hmm.
What else did I watch? I watched Tomorrow People.
Oh, yes.
All sorts. But my ultimate favourite, and this really I just loved and still love, was Thunderbirds. That was my thing. When I was really little, I thought I was Scott Tracy. I used to run around.
Didn't everybody?
Scott Tracy.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it was my first role, really.
Okay.
Being Scott Tracy.
Yeah.
That was my favourite.
So it was kind of your first, when you thought, oh, actually, I'd quite like to be in this and do this stuff.
I didn't even think that, I don't think.
Right.
I was probably about 6 or 7,
Oh,
so
right.
I wasn't really conscious.
Right. Yeah.
I did play characters even before I knew what playing characters was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so we've had a little divulge into what Sophie used to watch. I'm going to ask the question now that's stumped quite a lot of guests, and that is, if you could choose, and you've been involved in some very, very important programmes, may I add, in educational children's television. But if there was a programme that you could go back and do again, or a programme that may be relevant today, what sort of programme would it be?
Oh, goodness. Well, in terms of enjoyment and just like really having fun, I'd do all of it again.
Would you really?
There's not one single thing in my career that I would do differently.
And they would all be relevant today, I think, as well.
I think they all would. Well, a lot of them were very long-running programs.
Yeah.
Even things I used to do on the radio as well. There was lots of educational radio programs and dramas I used to do.
Yeah.
There was a wonderful BBC educational program called Shadow Play, which that was a drama.
Okay.
I can honestly say that I've been so fortunate in that I've absolutely loved everything I've done. Really.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Before we end, talk to us a little bit about what Sophie is up to nowadays. I know you're going to America very soon because it's Doctor Who mania all over again, because in case you didn't know, people, Sophie's iconic role, you're reprising Ace once again for us.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, it's just been a joy.
That must be full circle for you.
Yes, it's full circle, and
well, there we go. Just start again, Sophie. Just start with Ace and then do every programme again and give the next generation as much joy. You could do it all again. You've got all the life in you to do it.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it was wonderful to be beating up a Dalek with a baseball bat and
gosh,
shooting
30 years on, yeah.
Yeah. It was, really a joy.
Yeah. And how did that come about? I mean, how were you offered to do Ace again after all these years on the big screen?
Yeah, I was asked to do it. My agent got a call from Andy Pryor, who's the casting director, and she rang me and she said, Andy Pryor, casting director of Doctor Who, has just been on the phone and doing an availability check, and we all know what that means. And I came off the call, burst into tears, because it was the call that I'd been waiting for without really knowing it all these years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And then I had a call with Chris Chibnall, and then he wrote a script, and that was it. It was wonderful. Really, really great opportunity for me.
Right. Yeah, and you're back out in America next week doing all these fabulous tours and conventions, which must be a real personal thing, because you really do get to connect with your audience doing that.
It's wonderful. I don't know really many other programs where the fans, some of them have become great friends over the years. I've known many of the fans for over 30 years.
Yeah.
and it's going to be lovely to be going to America, because many of those fans I did know back in the day, and I haven't seen them for a while because of COVID and not being able to travel, so I'm making the most of it.
Yeah. So what is next for Sophia besides, travelling to the USA?
Well, I was just looking at all the conventions I'm lined up to do. I've got it's incredible. I've got really almost one a week for till Christmas, and then and then the New Year I'm going out to America again.
Yeah.
And then I've just been asked to go to New Zealand and Australia.
Wow.
And so yes, convention season will be upon us.
Yeah.
And then in between that, I do a lot of recording. So I do audiobooks and animation, and I shall just remain open, and as I always have done. And if anybody says, do you want to do this? I'll go, yes, please.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
See where life takes me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's by the sounds of things, you're still as busy as you were when I remember you 20 odd years ago. So that's just testimony to how fabulous you are at the work you do. Really, honestly, been a real pleasure and a joy to speak to somebody who has, it's not very often you can say, well, there was one person that actually was just there in your childhood, for many, many years. You felt comfortable. She was almost like auntie to everybody on the TV, and never mind the BBC, you were auntie to us all. So it's been a real honour and a privilege to talk about your colourful and glittery life. As I do on these podcasts, we do touch a little bit upon mental health and well-being, and you are absolutely at the forefront of that and have been for many, many years, not just in these educational programs, because as I said before, it kind of feels a bit more important when you're presenting to children, about the national curriculum. But you are a strong campaigner for that, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm a real advocate for sort of health of all kinds, and particularly mental health. And I'm very keen that young people and teens get the help they need, and that there's no stigma attached to mental health. So really, I do all I can.
Yeah, absolutely, and it comes across greatly. Well, Sophie, thank you very much for joining me. The last question I have, and I say to all my guests, have a little think. You're going to now tell me a theme tune to play out when this podcast goes out. So get your thinking caps on, Sophie. What would you like to be played out today during your podcast?
Well, toss up, really. It's between... it's between the Blue Peter theme, which, as Billy Connolly so rightly said, should be our national anthem.
Yes.
And
he would say that.
Yes, and the Thunderbird theme.
Right.
But I think it's going to be Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds. There we go. I'm quite pleased you said that, because we had we have requests quite a lot for the Blue Peter theme, although it's changed quite a bit over the years. So yeah, we will definitely, when this podcast is edited, definitely play out the Thunderbirds theme. Now, it's going to be a bit tricky for you because there's not a distinctive character where you've actually played a distinctive voice, because normally I say, can you please play this character out on the podcast and tell everybody why they should listen to it, but you are Sophie Socket, and you always will be, so let's just have Sophie Socket telling everybody why they should watch this podcast, your podcast, and the other podcasts on the channel, if you will, please.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, my name is Sophie Socket, I'm in the rack and rocket. There's something in my pocket. Can you guess what it is? Oh, it's quite varied. It's fun. It's got lots of questions. It's got some very nice people. It's this podcast.
Oh, Sophie, that's brilliant. I've been transported back 20 odd years ago now. That is just fantastic. Sophie, it's been a joy to chat to you. It really has. As I said before, you've had the most extraordinary career, and you really are the loveliest person that I've spoken to. Very kind indeed. And I look forward to more of these podcasts. And as Sophie Socket said, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like it too, and click the notification bell, and you will be up to date with all of these podcasts. And we certainly have had lots of requests to have Sophie on this channel, which is a testimony to yourself, Sophie. Sophie Aldred, you have been my blast from the past in a podcast. And just like you, this has been Ace.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.